From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to the show. I'm Ken Davis, and yes, I'll admit it, I've been one of those whiners complaining that if President Obama ever did get around to attempting increased gun regulation, it'd be a timid and deeply compromised approach. You know, the old, well, we can't get the whole loaf, so maybe we'll take one small slice if they'll let us have it, that routine. But we whiners were caught off guard yesterday with the Obama-Biden proposals that they could add up to the most sweeping gun regulation effort in decades, and a lot of it is being accomplished with executive action, not what many of us expected. So, of course, we have a special interest in these matters here in Chicago because our mayor, like the president he once served, has also been very active in the gun debate all of a sudden the last couple of weeks. So what does it mean for all of us here in Chicago? We're going to talk about that on the show today. And school closings, they're still very big in the news. Why exactly is CPS focused on closing schools when their own internal analysis says that you don't really save that much money by closing a school? Could it be that so many of them are ending up in the hands of private corporations? And isn't the fact that the city has opened so many charters in recent years the real reason that enrollment in the traditional schools is down? That's on our agenda today too. But whatever we decide about these issues, it looks like we will have Rahm Emanuel to kick around for a few more years because he's flooding money into the election tanks and he intends to be around for a while. He's funding what is called the Don't Get In My Way Fund, and we'll be talking about that with Steve Edwards and Matt Farmer, who are joining us today. Two old friends back at the table, and we're happy to have you here. Steve Edwards now with the University of Chicago Institute for Politics. Glad to have you, Steve.
Great to be back.
Matt Farmer, musician, rabble-rouser, attorney, blogger, just kind of general, in-your-face kind of guy.
Thanks for that description, Ken.
So you weren't kidding about the long guitar solos before?
Oh no! You got to see this guy playing. I've been to several of his concerts. Yes. So welcome to our program today. Let's start with you going to fly to Los Angeles, and you find that you're going to be flying on a 787 Dreamliner. Do you take the flight or do you not?
I think I rebook. You just when it comes to air travel, the idea that there might be not just one but two fires breaking out on two of these new Dreamliner planes is enough to give people caution, and clearly it was enough to give the FAA caution earlier this week.
Well, I mean, it gave Apple apoplexy when their laptops were catching fire on people's laps. If you're running a company that has airplanes that are catching fire, it's a wow. It's a
Well, and what a big story for Boeing, too.
Whoa.
I mean, they've staked so much on the 787, and it was late getting to market, and here they are now, ready to sort of herald this new era in air travel, looking at this to boost their fortunes, to be a more fuel-efficient plane in this sort of global debate and competition against Airbus. And now these planes are grounded, and there are a lot of questions about whether they can get it turned around.
We're recording the show today, right at this moment, our distinguished mayor was supposed to be welcoming this delegation from Poland on the first flight coming in on lot, and now the FAA says you ain't flying that thing into Chicago. So, oh my God, it's a huge, difficult, complex problem for them. And of course, the weird part about it is, I was thinking about this morning. It's like, okay, so you go through all the certification process and you make all the corrections and you do everything so this plane, you fly at another 20,000 hours and you prove that it's absolutely airworthy. Who believes it? How do you make people have confidence in an airplane?
The Boeing 787 seems to have more leaks than Jean-Claude Brassard's CPS office did a year ago.
You won't let go of Jean-Claude Brassard, will you? He's gone. I don't know if you know that.
He's the gift that keeps giving. He doesn't quite go away.
Jean-Claude Brassard is no longer with us. He got a new job. He's going back to Washington, I saw yesterday, right? So, well, anyway, let's talk about this gun thing. Steve, your institute held quite a star-studded thing the other night down at the university. A lot of talk about guns and a lot of talk about gun regulation. I don't even know where to begin on this because this is one of these few stories where it truly is national and Chicago. It's like they're completely tied together. I mean, let's bring the Chicago angle in. There were some criticisms of the University of Chicago at Channel 5's blog and a few others, saying, "Oh, isn't this nice? It's like, you know, the president has his thing, and now all of a sudden the University of Chicago has noticed the gun situation when, you know, we had 510 people shot dead last year." How do you put the two together? How do you connect the national gun debate with the Chicago gun debate?
Well, I think they're all part of the piece, and certainly as it relates to the University of Chicago, I mean, the Institute of Politics just launched. We saw what happened at Sandy Hook and the reaction to it, and we felt similarly, and we felt that this was a great opportunity to bring that national conversation to Chicago. But at the same time, we're watching 506 homicides. When I was at WBEZ, we spent a good portion of the last year on the show that I hosted breaking down the problems of urban violence in a whole series of perspectives. What's interesting, though, is so much attention right now around the Sandy Hook massacre and the others that took place in 2012 has been focused on assault weapons, and we saw that in the president's announcement as well. And there's a lot of interest and a lot of debate over an assault weapons ban that was on the books in '94, problems with it, was it effective, was it not? The difference I would say about Chicago, to your earlier point, is the fact that we know that the vast majority of crimes committed with guns in the United States, and certainly in the city of Chicago, have to do with handguns.
Right.
So in some respects, a big debate on assault weapons is maybe acutely important for the broader picture. It's less important on the city of Chicago's doorstep. The other thing I think you can say is that we know, and Jens Ludwig at the University of Chicago's crime lab, which has been looking at this, he's one of the foremost experts studying gun violence, you know, pointed out at our panel that 80% of guns owned in the United States are owned mostly by people in rural communities. They own a lot of guns, multiple guns. Most of them have no criminal record and no criminal intent. And it's that 20% of the guns in circulation, and in circulation, particularly among young people, that is the acute problem. And so the policies really should be focused on trying to address that issue.
Right, exactly.
And you know, it remains to be seen how much of this package actually really gets to that. That was a big focus of the conversation on Tuesday.
But how do you get the folks who are that 80% or 85 or whatever it is percent, the people who tend not to be in the urban centers, how do you convince them? How does Barack Obama convince them that this is not a move to take away their guns or to, you know, to confiscate weaponry and everything else? How do you get these two impossibly separate groups of people to sit down at the same table and talk?
Well, that's what we were trying to do. And we actually had two people on our panel, one of whom had an A rating from the NRA, voted with the NRA 93% of the time, just retired from Congress.
93%, so he wasn't really very loyal.
Yes, he was definitely squishy on the gun issue when
That's
it came
right.
to
So one of
the
those
gun
liberals.
But you know, one thing that he pointed out, and Steve Chapman, who has been writing about guns from the Tribune, and has over the years been more pro-gun rights than not, been very skeptical of the efficacy of a lot of gun control measures. Both of them really pointed out a couple of things. They said that, first of all, the NRA does not, despite its largesse and its loud voice in this conversation, speak for all gun owners, number one. Number two, there was also, I think, an agreement that the discussion around things like background checks, which the president proposed in significant detail, that those are things that actually could make a big difference in terms of efficacy in reducing illegal guns in the wrong hands, and that you could get a lot of gun rights supporters to think about moving on. And in fact, to your point, Mayor Bloomberg in New York, who launched this Mayors Against Guns campaign, hired Republican pollster Frank Luntz
that's really
to
interesting.
poll gun owners and NRA members to find out, of the range of possible solutions and policies, what might there be movement on. I think it's no surprise that the packages, part of the package that was introduced yesterday or introduced this week by President Obama includes a number of things that actually pulled fairly high on this. So I don't know that that's a full answer to your question, but I think
well, there is no full answer.
But I think it's trying to find those areas where it's not all or nothing. It's actually something that gun owners would be willing to support. And if you can cross that with things that the data shows to be effective, you might be able to start to inch this forward. Rahm Emanuel, really quickly on this, suggested what the president should do is leave Washington, go not to Chicago or to New York, but go to a part of the country
Go to Wyoming.
Go to Wyoming. Go to Aurora, Colorado. Go to a place where there's a mix of views or a strong gun rights community, and have this conversation. That he would actually gain more political capital and be able to start to move people in Washington on this issue if he could do that effectively.
I think that really is a good suggestion. That to me makes a lot of sense. I can see. One of the most spectacular successes of the first year or the first term of Barack Obama was that meeting he had with the Republicans. Remember that?
Yeah.
Where we all remember that meeting where, they thought they were coming in to lecture him, and he ended up kind of turning things around. And he does have that ability, and it would be interesting to see him use that skill that he has that I think he doesn't use very often to maybe make that persuasive case.
Now, when I looked at the president's proposals, just the outline that I saw in the newspaper, I looked at this from the perspective, myself as a Chicago parent, and also my background. I've never owned a gun. I've never fired a gun. I have been face down in an outdoor parking lot with somebody on top of me in a ski mask with a gun on my back. That said, I travel the country a lot. I've got lots of friends who are gun owners, hunters, etc. And when I look at our crime problem in Chicago, as Steve's pointed out, these aren't killings that by and large are taking place with assault weapons. We do have a Cook County assault weapons ban in place, I think, currently, right?
I believe that's right.
And so when I look at the proposals, the question in my mind is, how many of these will actually affect the homicide rate in Chicago? If they're all enacted, if they're able to get all this stuff through. And I don't see much of this having an effect on what's going on in our town.
Well, you see, that's the problem, is that everybody who has a dog in this race all say the same thing. This isn't going to affect this. It isn't going to affect that. None of this is going to have any effect on anything. But at some point, I guess you just have to sort of, I'm sort of persuaded by this argument that, well, what if we just didn't have any laws about cars? There just are no laws. You can just do whatever you want. We can't even imagine that.
And I'm not suggesting for a minute that the president should have done nothing. What I do find, I guess, the cynic in me says, well, all of this came about, A, second term, he's reelected, and two, after a bunch of white kids were all shot in one incident, one horrific incident, mind you. And it's not the steady stream of black and brown kids getting shot. We've got 26, I think, at this point, January 2013. That brings to the forefront this call for gun reform and gun legislation.
It raises a very interesting parallel political issue, which is the issue of Rahm Emanuel and Rahm Emanuel as a politician. Lynn Sweet wrote very eloquently a couple of weeks ago in the Sun-Times about how Rahm Emanuel was one of the people who advised the president not to touch this gun thing when they were trying to put together the Democratic congressional campaign.
And dressed down Attorney General Eric Holder with four-letter words,
classic
telling
ways,
him,
right? Telling him not to talk about guns. Now, things have changed, and yes, it's possible to be very cynical and say exactly the thing that you're saying, but on the other hand, I guess my feeling is these guys are, I hate to admit it this way, but they are very good politicians. They know how to take the pulse of the zeitgeist.
It was Mayor Emanuel as chief of staff who famously said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Right. And here you have a window of opportunity, and I'm sure his advice to the president, if he were there, would be to move forward on this.
And he probably still does give advice to the president, and that's probably the advice. It's like, okay, this time let's go for it. We got this little tiny window in here. Let's see what we can get done.
I also wonder, though, and I don't know what the two of you think about this. We're a month out from the Sandy Hook massacre. The conversation has already started to change a little bit. In the immediate days and weeks, you actually had people like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who campaigned as one of the most ardent supporters of gun rights and NRA supporters in the nation. Those were in his re-election ads, saying, wait, we need to have a different kind of conversation. You had Representative La Tourette, who I referred to, saying the same kind of thing. Well, people have walked that back in the weeks since. Now we also have the forces starting to, really dig in their heels. Will we be talking about this issue in the same way in a month from now?
No.
Will there be anything significant that will happen in Congress, 2 months from now on this, or will we be left with a few executive orders
unless there's another mass shooting, which would amp
put
it up.
the focus back on.
And there's the other question, though. Even if this wish list was enacted, how do we know what any of it will ultimately bring about in terms of a reduction in shootings or killings? And I guess that's unknowable. And the argument is, well, even if we can save a few lives, isn't that worth it? So again, I'm not opposing the president's proposal. I'm just cynically wondering if it will have any effect in Chicago.
And look, I mean, we've been in the city of Chicago, which up until recently had a handgun ban for years, and we've seen the city's homicide rate skyrocket through that time, then ebb, and now inch back up. You could argue, I guess, that without the handgun ban, things would have been much worse, but it's hard to see a direct correlation there. Then the other thing, you have 300 million guns in circulation in the United States. So if you just stopped everything today, no further manufacturing
If you
guns,
stopped all manufacturing of all
you
firearms,
still have you have almost enough firearms for every man, woman, and child in the country.
and some of those have been around since 1880. They tend to have a long shelf life.
They do, and you also have
they're
a
very
hard
well
time.
made.
You mentioned the car thing, and I know we need to move on to other issues. But if you were to sell me your car, that would be a transaction between two private
and that
individuals.
would end our friendship.
It probably would, actually. And a lot of gun owners say, look, if I want to sell another collector a gun, I should be able to do that the same way you can sell other things on Craigslist. Now you're telling me I've got to go through background checks and all this other paperwork. So, it seems to me trying to figure out that secondary market, the underground market, the illegal market, and the existing stockpile of weapons is as important as anything we do going forward.
I think as much as anything, though, the thing that begins to nibble at this is if the person who was last responsible for that gun, it remains responsible for that gun until they are legally no longer responsible for it. So if some kid takes this gun and shoots somebody with it, you can go to jail for that. That to me is that seems like responsible citizenship.
You raise the issue of putting folks in jail, and I think I read recently that Mayor Emanuel is talking about getting mandatory minimums, in effect for gun crimes. But we got to remember, we're doing this against an Illinois backdrop of a overcrowded prison system,
absolutely,
where we've got spots for about 33,000 inmates, currently being occupied by close to 50,000 inmates. So to arrest our way and prosecute our way out of this mess is going to require folks like, it's going to require a change in our prison system.
It might be interesting, though, if the prisons were overfilled with people who had illegally trafficked in firearms instead of kids who had
selling weed,
$10 worth of marijuana in their pockets. Right. There's that. Okay. Have we solved this one? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're happy. Don't thank us. It's just what we do here on the little show. But you know what? Let's sort of transition in while we're on this subject. Rahm Emanuel and Gary McCarthy had a press conference this last week, and they said that they are redoing community policing. They're reviving community policing in our town.
Do we still have community policing? I mean, look, CAPS was a huge part of what Mayor Daley did in the late 90s when the homicide rate spiked up. There was a lot of attention, a lot of
kind of like local school councils.
Absolutely. And yes, it still exists as far as I can tell, but how many of us have been to a CAPS meeting? How many of us know people who regularly go to CAPS meetings? And how strong has that program really been in the last 5 to 10 years? It's hard to see outside of pockets where those individual beat meetings are really robust that it's actually been a vital part of the policing strategy from my perspective. I could be completely wrong about that.
In the proposed revision to this CAPS program does not appear to come with any requisite or corresponding increase in funding. In fact,
it comes with
a
a
decrease in funding.
It comes with the requisite decrease in funding.
So the question again as to what effect it will have, I mean, the question will be, will the funding cap on CAPS have any effect on the number of folks busting CAPS, in Chicago?
Well, I think there's a possibility that maybe they'll outsource the personnel to a private company, and then they'll cut their benefits and cut their salaries.
Although I
while
will
they're doing
say, if you look at what Superintendent McCarthy has said, certainly during his time in Chicago and beyond, he's talked a lot about this idea of police legitimacy and theories of policing,
and admirably so,
that get you closer to building a long-term relationship with the community. That's part of why he has been a big fan of the beat system and re-energizing that. So pushing forward to revitalize, to reinvigorate a community policing model is completely consistent with what he said in terms of his philosophy.
True.
And if he can do that effectively, I do think that could pay dividends when we talk about
one of the things about McCarthy is that if he gets to keep his job for a couple of years, we're not really going to know how effective he is until 2 or 3 years from now. We may look back on it and say this guy really did bring some new thinking to the police department. But one of the awkward challenges he faces, and I can't say that I would be able to do it any better, is when you're working for a mayor who keeps telling you, you got to do all this, this, and this, and this with fewer people and less money and less resources, and you're going to stand up there in front of those cameras and smile about it and say that it's your idea, buddy. You kind of have to do it if you want to keep your job, so that's what they do, right? They all have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fiscal environment and the political environment, whether it's around the police, whether it's around schools, it's enormously challenging. I mean, look at who would want some of these jobs? You know, how do you solve your way out of these problems
you're absolutely
in
right.
a climate of impatience, the need to produce immediately, and where resources are not only thin, but I mean, you've never talked about pensions on this show, I know. I mean, these bills for every single one of these agencies just gets bigger and worse.
Yeah. Well, we now both have the distinction of being former WBEZ employees. After I left BEZ, I went, as you know, to the city and worked there, and I was there during the real salad days, like 1996 during the conventions when there was it just seemed like everywhere you look, you open a drawer and there's money, And now it was fun actually working at the city in those days. I can't imagine what it must be like working for the city today, or for any government.
For the state.
And for the state, any government, and just knowing that you have to do everything with half the money, half the resources. We've kind of, I guess we've beaten this one to death.
And half the intellectual honesty.
Well, no, it's about the same. It's with about the same amount of intellectual honesty. Matt, I want to have you on the show because there's so much going on, and we've managed to eat up almost the entire show. I feel guilty about that, but this thing about school closings, you've written about it so well. You follow this so closely. Just from the top, why is it that CPS feels at this point that it's so important to close all these schools, that they've actually set up a commission that went out and did the commission work and came back and said, we don't really think there's much you can do, or we don't really think there are too many schools you should close, or, well, we don't really know what we think. I mean, what's happening here?
I think the overarching theme is we being CPS, we need to do something. We need to keep feeding the media beast, cranking out press releases saying we are making progress.
Okay,
and sometimes progress is just issuing a press release saying this school is, in our eyes, failing, we are shutting it down, therefore providing kids with better opportunities. This school is underutilized, therefore it's a drain on resources, we're shutting it down and we're going to provide kids with better opportunities. There are a lot of questions, obviously. We've been closing schools since 1997 in one way or another, and at the same time opening all sorts of schools.
Right.
As WBEZ recently reported, of the 75 schools closed in the last stretch of time, 40% of them have been handed over to private operators. Okay, so we've got that going, which means a cheaper workforce. We've got an independent commission headed by, the former ComEd
Frank Clark,
CEO, who's got a charter school named after him. Okay, this is a commission that says we're only going to.
It's an independent commission.
Sure, Terry Hilliard, who got a no-bid contract for NATO. I mean, none of these folks have any ties to the mayor. I mean, they're
no.
Right.
No.
So.
I resent that you're implying that there is some kind of. I mean,
And for the first,
you can't prove it.
for the first month or two of this commission's existence, they couldn't get their stories straight in the media about what it was they were supposed to do. Barbara Byrd Bennett said, "I want you, Commission, to provide me with a list of schools you're going to close."
Right.
The Commission
and they
said,
"Oh no, we're not doing that." I mean, there are some things we'll do, but we're not doing that.
I asked Mr. Clark about that at a hearing, and Noreen Ahmed Allah from the Tribune was present, and I pointed to her. I said, "She's just written about this today, explaining this problem." His response to the crowd at this Fieldhouse meeting was, "Don't believe everything you read in the newspapers." Now, these are quotes from the principals involved in these issues, but in any event, so we're on the cusp of closing a bunch of schools, supposedly because of utilization. But the Commission's report that came out just a week ago brought in all sorts of academic and performance factors into its calculus, saying leave what are called level 1 schools alone, the high performance schools. Level 2 schools that are, quote, on the rise, end quote, whatever that means.
However you define
that.
that.
So now we're bringing in this performance standard, which is
and
problematic.
it wasn't supposed to be about performance. It was supposed to be about utilization.
Correct.
Right?
And the other key issue here is Barbara Byrd Bennett started all this by saying, as part of this, there will be a 5-year moratorium on school closings.
That was her idea.
What she hasn't said, though, and I can't get a straight answer. I asked 2 high-level officials last week at a state meeting about this. They're still going to reserve the right to turn around schools, close schools for performance reasons, phase out schools. So, this really isn't worth the paper it's printed on. 5-year moratorium, we don't know whether Ms. Byrd Bennett's going to be here. As I pointed out last week at this commission meeting, which was January 11th, I said since January 11th, 2009, we are now on our 5th CEO in 4 years. So the notion that you are going to bind future CEOs, and God forbid we have a different mayor, within 5 years, to this promise of a moratorium, again, I don't think is worth the paper it's printed on. So I don't know if this answers your question. What I do think will happen is Terry Hilliard may get another no-bid contract, because I promise you there will be thousands of people in the streets in spring. CPS, I think, made a mistake when they got this extension to get more time to consider school closings, because what this has done has allowed the community more time to organize and get folks from communities that aren't really even affected by this, but who are so fed up with what's going on downtown to get on board and start researching these issues of what does underutilization mean, what is your formula for deciding how schools are used.
The Tribune series, I think, really ignited a lot of that conversation, because so many things were revealed in that, not the least of which is that Barbara Byrd Bennett's bold plan was actually something that was discussed long before she was even put in the office.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of a list is just ridiculous. In the sense that I think both sides are probably right, in the sense that there's probably not a list at central administration that says, this is the list of all of the schools that we are going to close, bolded at the top. But you cannot tell me that they have not looked at this. And if they haven't,
then,
shame on them.
Then they're malfeasant.
I mean, come on. So I'm sure there's all sorts of short lists and analysis. Schools that, if you cut it this way, in terms of utilization, they would be on the target.
Well, we had Jesse Ruiz from the board sitting in this chair and asked him the question. It's like, well, it's all about criteria, right? It's all about how you cut the numbers.
Well, when that's it. And last year there were 140.
Less than a minute, I'm afraid.
There were 140 schools that met the criteria for so-called school actions. They ultimately ended up moving on 17 of those schools. But what CPS has never been able to explain is, how did you get from 140 to 17? And by the way, 7,700 kids were affected by those 17 school actions. Have you done anything to figure out whether those kids' lives and academic experiences have been improved by your actions?
I cannot underscore that enough. Since 1996, we still don't know what are the criteria for closing schools. We still don't know what actually proves to be successful thereafter. We don't have a process for how you bring the public in. Every single time it seems ad hoc, and it would seem this late into the game, the school district should do a much, much better job of being clear and being able to deliver on those.
And that's it. That's where we have to stop. I'm so sorry. We're out of time. Steve Edwards from the University of Chicago. It feels weird to say that, but Steve Edwards from the University of Chicago joining us today, and Matt Farmer from around the way, HuffPo and all kinds of things. Anyway, a great blogger. You should check out his work. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, just in case you didn't know. That's what we are right here on CAN TV. We're a community service, and you can see us by just dialing up the old Googles and looking at this right here anytime you want this address, or you can get us on iTunes as a video or an audio podcast. I hope you'll do that. And what I really hope is you'll come back next week and watch us again, because we're going to try again next week to see if we can get it right. Come back. We'll see you then. This is the Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. Bye.